My name's Rob Banks. I'm the Director of the Animal Genetics and Breeding Unit in Armidale at UNE.
You're looking at genetics and genomics. Where are we up to? How are we going in and trying to identify different genetic characteristics in DNA?
We're making really good progress in Australia, and we're essentially up with anybody in the world. The big thing is that we're developing genomic tests for things like growth rate, fertility, marbling and so forth, the traits that we're interested in. And as long as we've got enough data on the animals that we're interested in, we've got tests that work quite well, and as we add more data, the accuracy is rising, and as basically DNA technology improves, the price will probably come down somewhat.
What traits are we looking at? What is the industry really trying to determine to try and improve performance and productivity?
Okay, the basic production traits I think really come down to fertility, growth rate, and increasingly feed efficiency will be important. Once we get beyond the farm gate, then we're interested in things like carcass yield, marbling and eating quality. Now some of those things we can measure already, stud breeders measure them, so growth rate, fertility, and we're making good progress for those things because people can get the records on them on the animals. But the ones that are increasingly valuable further down the value chain towards the consumer, it's much harder for us to get records on, and that's where genomics is really starting to make a difference. So you can get tests for marbling ability, for instance, in young animals now that are really quite useful just using a DNA test.
They're certainly useful, but is anyone actually using them at the moment to, for example, with marbling, change the level of marbling?
The leading studs, particularly in breeds like Angus and Wagyu, are starting to use DNA testing on, for instance, their young bulls. I think we're at a stage where they're testing the product, testing the concept, if you like, making sure it's working for them, and it is. And so we're starting to see DNA testing complement the scanning that's used, for instance. So you can live scan animals for marbling, that's useful. The genomic tests, as they get more accurate, are going to increasingly supplant that. And that we're sort of at that start where it's going from a little bit to starting to rise in volume.
Are you finding that any particular breeds using this technology more than others?
Angus is definitely ahead of the rest. Partly because the Angus population in America is very big and genomic tests have been developed over there and people were interested to see if they work here, and so we've had to calibrate them for Australia. It's partly just because they've got more animals being recorded, but industry's got some really quite exciting projects going with the Angus breed, Hereford, Charolais, Limousin, Brahman, Wagyu, and very keen to get into the tropical composite area as well. But there is a real challenge that have to be stressed, is that you've got to have some numbers behind you to make the genomic tests work. So in a sense, the bigger breeds are going to get more benefit out of it more quickly.
So to get benefit then, you mentioned, is any breed or any particular trait actually starting to gain traction to actually achieve productivity improvements?
Marbling is the one which I would say most immediately we're starting to see people. There is a marbling trend already in the Angus breed. We're just starting to see signs of that increasing. The same's going to happen in Wagyu. They're just moving from research phase to using the tool. And I think marbling is probably going to be the first one because it's got such a huge influence on the price that's paid to the producer.
So what sort of productivity, performance or improvements can be made in using marbling selection?
The rate of progress for marbling probably go up 2 or 3 times as fast with genomic tests once they're the right accuracy. Progress now is okay, it's going to be significantly faster. And if people have looked at, well, what's the benefit over the total package of things that we want the cattle to do from having good genomic tests, and typically because there's such a range of things that people are interested in, genomic tests will probably help us increase the rate of progress something like 25 to 33%.
And it's also important to note that with genomic testing, it's not actually implanting any DNA, it's just actually selecting the right traits.
Absolutely. Cannot stress that too strongly. We're not talking about transferring genes between species or anything remotely like that. Where essentially it's almost like DNA is giving us a microscope, and we can look at the DNA of the animals and work out which ones have got the best genetics, and that's what stud breeders have always wanted to do. We can now help them do that more accurately than they've been able to previously, so we can go faster. But it is absolutely not about gene transfer.